Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. We will begin the presentation as soon as all of the attendees have a chance to get in.
Joe, are we going to start this when everybody gets in, or are we going to start this at 10 o'clock?
We will wait for about, I would suggest to wait for about another 2 minutes or so. It can take a little bit for attendees to, for Zoom to actually get people in. So they're probably already there trying to get in, and it just takes a sec.
Okay.
Is that okay, Dagny?
Yes, good morning, everyone. We're going to start in just a couple minutes. Joe, just let us know when you think all the attendees are in. If you could let Commissioner French know, then he can go ahead. Thank you.
I think we should be good to go, Commissioner French.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jim French. Most of you probably know me, but I'm current Nevada NACo president. And we're going to go ahead and kick this thing off and get started. First off, welcome to Nevada Association of Counties 2020 Annual Conference. And thanks for joining us today. For your engagement with NACo, before we go any further, I'd like to introduce Joe Dickney, who is going to be doing much of the IT work with administering this Zoom call. He's an economist for University of Nevada Extension Community and Economic Development Program, and he is our technical guru today, who is helping us manage the meeting, as I said, with our Zoom platform. So thank you, Joe, and thanks to Extension for the support and the assistance with our conference, as well as our partnership with Nevada County's NACo 2020 conference. As I said earlier, I am Humboldt County Commissioner Jim French, and I am today currently the 2020 president. First off, I'd like to thank all the attendees for being here. It's a tough way to attend a meeting, and takes a little bit of commitment for everybody to park themselves in front of a computer for another Zoom meeting. But I thank you for that, and we'll see county commissioners, commissioner-elects, and other county elected officials, county staff, and NACo associate members, sponsors, and thanks for braving the platform again, as I said earlier. I guess I'd take a couple of minutes for a few comments. I'm kind of reflecting on the times we're living in right now, but take a collective sigh, I guess. I guess this is a virtual format for conducting this annual conference is a fitting way for us to come to a close of the 2020 year when you consider the circus that 2020 has been. That being said, I would like to thank the I guess I would like to thank the Communist Chinese Party for creating a worldwide public health pandemic and for single-handedly turning the world economy upside down. That's where it started. It's certainly caused me to rethink my product selection and spending habits for sure. In spite of those, guys, states and counties rose to immense challenges, and for that, I'm proud to be associated with that. Of course, we're not out of the woods yet, and we are, but I'm confident that we will emerge better for it. Those of you who know me well know that I'm a glass half full kind of guy, optimist. And as we emerge from this, counties will have developed public health protocols on a level unimaginable 10 months ago. We've all found it necessary to balance budgets in the light of drastic revenue cuts and retain essential programs where we could. But more importantly, we have marshaled what assets we have to provide services and support none of us envisioned this time last year. Unemployment, just to name a few, unemployment of entire employment sectors, Medicaid expansion, testing protocols, increased capacity for ICU beds, just to name a few. We also found it necessary for governments to share resources to provide support to our local businesses and their employees who are struggling to remain viable. As communities, we rallied around our citizens and businesses, and for the first time, we looked at those small businesses and workers as neighbors, all trying to make living and essential to our collective well-being. Yes, we will emerge from this better for it. I just want to say a few words about our commissioner-elects. For those folks in our midst who stepped up to volunteer as county commissioners, that is the commissioner-elects. Thanks for your sacrifice in advance. The skills and training to do this job effectively and efficiently for those folks who hired us can be found in the training offered at this conference and later through the POWER program offered by the University of Nevada Extended Studies program. I encourage all who are in the program and those who contemplate entering to take advantage of the knowledge and expertise offered. As my dad once said, you may have been born for this job, but you still need to fill your toolbox to do the job. So I just can't overemphasize that. I think folks need to, who are just entering public service, need to take advantage of those services that are provided by Nevada NACo at our conferences and other meetings, as well as National NACo. As new commissioner back in 2011, I felt NACo, both national and local, were a good resource for lobbying and commission support. It has become clear to me that the services of NACo is far greater than I once thought. NACo as a staff accomplishes a wide range of services and is always willing and prepared to assume additional projects where needed. I've learned to depend on those professionals to improve the representation that I provide. And as a commissioner, I have had the opportunity to work with National NACo through the Western Interstate Region and Public Lands Steering Committee. The interaction on the national stage, I have found that Nevada has become and remains very relevant with regard to policy direction and protection of freedom and lifestyle in Nevada. For that, I am very thankful for our Nevada staff as well as our National NACo staff. They are a huge resource for those counties who choose to use them, and I would encourage that those counties, those of you who are just coming into public service, step up and involve yourself along those lines. So with that, I want to take the time to thank those folks that are sitting in front of their computer right now, and I look forward to participating in the conference with you. I look forward to a time when we can all meet in person and enjoy each other's fellowship. So with that, thank you. And that concludes my comments for this morning. I'll go with, excuse me. At any rate, now I'd like to introduce NACo's 2020 officers. I'm honored to be your current president, and I appreciate the vote of confidence that you gave me, and I look forward to working with you down the road. Our president-elect is Clark County Commissioner Marilyn Kirkpatrick. She will be our fearless leader and NACo president in 2021. Our vice president is Washoe County Commissioner Bob Lucy. Commissioner Lucy will ascend to NACo president in 2022. And our past president is Lander County Commissioner Patsy Waite. And I personally would like to thank Patsy for her leadership of NACo in 2019. The individuals also make up NACo's executive committee, and thanks to each of them for their leadership and service. It's been an honor to work with you. Just a reminder to all conference attendees, tomorrow morning at NACo's annual business meeting, we will be electing NACo's 2021 vice president and commissioner. That commissioner will be our NACo 2023 president. So at this time, I'd like to recognize our sponsors. We rely on our sponsors to support us and could not put this conference together without them. We want to offer them our sincere thanks, not only for their support of NACo and the services that we provide, but the services that many of them provide to our counties. And as you can see on the graphic, we have our platinum sponsors: University of Nevada Extension, LP Insurance, Nevada Energy, Ormat, Poolpack, and USI Insurance Services. Our silver is A&H Insurance Incorporated, AT&T, BEC Environmental, Lumos Associates, Nevada Rural Housing Authority. Now I'd like to introduce NACo's Executive Director, Dagny Stapleton. And for those of you who don't know Dagny well, the commissioner-elects that are out there, Dagny, she's a heck of a resource for this agency, and I've enjoyed very much working with her. Dagny, go ahead.
Thank you so much, President French, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. I want to echo some of the words that President French said about your willingness to sit in front of your computer screen this morning and join us. Thank you so much to all of you for attending and participating. Welcome also to all the commissioner-elects. Of course, all the county commissioners in attendance, county elected officials, county staff, and our associate members and sponsors. NACo is here to support you, each of Nevada's counties, and to provide you with a venue for collaboration, to advocate for you on issues, common to all counties. As you know, the work that each of you do is critical in your communities, and so we thank you for your service to every Nevadan. I want to take a moment just to let Joe Lednicki from Extension provide us with any technical housekeeping information. Joe, is there anything that you want to share with attendees before we go further this morning?
Absolutely, I would be happy to. And thank you very much for the introduction, Dagny. As she said, I'll be assisting with the technical facilitation of today's session. Due to the great amount of participation that we anticipate within this session, we have disabled the cameras, microphones, and the chat for attendees, as I'm sure you've already noticed. But we do encourage all attendees to participate by asking questions through Zoom's Q&A function. This will allow us to gather questions to be answered at the appropriate time during the session. You may ask questions at any point and we'll get to them. As a reminder to our moderators and our guest speakers, I may hop in from time to time just in case there are any technical hiccups or any other items that need to be addressed. So thank you very much, Dagny, and back to you.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks so much again to Cooperative Extension for their sponsorship and their partnership with counties and all of their help with our conference. One thing that we did this year was to try to support efforts to get the message out about everything that counties do, everything that each of you do in your communities, and especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's so important what all the counties have been doing on the public health front. And so we created a video with support from the National Association that illustrates, we think, just how much counties do in Nevada and how important all of the services are that you provide. This video also thanks county staff for all that they do. So we want to play that really quickly for everyone.
Hospital workers, EMS responders, contact tracers, and human services providers are some of the frontline heroes of the COVID-19 response. And in Nevada, many of them are county employees. Counties matter, and they serve every Nevadan every day. During COVID-19, Nevada's counties are a critical part of the public health response, supporting health districts, providing regional emergency services, and preparing quarantine and isolation beds. Counties are the provider of the local social safety net. Nevadans most in need rely on counties to provide child protective services, meals to those in need, and services to the homeless and seniors. Nevada's counties are responsible for providing over 20% of the state's Medicaid budget and support public hospitals throughout the state. Counties do all this in addition to providing the everyday municipal and regional services that Nevadans depend on, like roads, parks, water and sewer systems, community centers, libraries, and county airports. Counties also administer elections, helping to ensure one of our most sacred democratic rights. Nevada's counties matter, and in difficult economic times, county services are more important than ever and more in demand. We thank the nearly 23,000 Nevadans that are county employees. We are counties. We are Nevada.
Thank you, and thanks to all the counties that contributed videos and pictures and support so that we could create that video. Don't be afraid to continue sharing it on your social media and through your public information outreach and officers. Before I introduce our next speaker, I want to mention and thank Churchill County. They were supposed to host the conference this year, and we instead had to meet virtually. We will go forward with an in-person conference, we all hope, next year in Fallon in September. So we hope you will all join us then in Churchill County. I'd also like to thank the NACo staff, Colby Prout, Natural Resources Manager, NACo Office Manager Amanda Evans, who has done so much work on this conference this year and to make this all happen. And finally, NACo's Deputy Director, Vincent Guthrow, who many of you know as well, and who does a great job for NACo. We have two fantastic speakers lined up for you this morning. And I'd like to introduce NACo's Vice President, Washoe County Commission Chair Bob Lucy, to tell you more about them. Commissioner Lucy has been a commissioner in Washoe County since 2014 and was elected chair in 2020. Commissioner Lucy is a fifth-generation Nevadan and a longtime resident of Washoe County, and he has served on the NACo board since 2016. Commissioner Lucy.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Dagny. It was so wonderful to see you all today. I appreciate everybody that's attending virtually today. As Dagny said, we have two amazing speakers that are lined up this morning to join us and share their thoughts with us. But before I introduce our speakers, though, I want to recognize and introduce LP Insurance, who is sponsoring the session today. And LP Insurance Services is one of our platinum sponsors for this conference. And through that, we have Trinity Steelman. She is a principal with LP Insurance, and she'll say a few words for us. So, Trinity.
Good morning. I'm Trinity Steelman with LP Insurance Services, and we are so pleased to be part of your NACo conference. Hopefully next year we'll all be together, but for today I'm very grateful to be with you virtually. As many of you know, we are right now in the midst of also some healthcare changes, and on October 29th of 2020, the Department of Labor, Health and Human Services and the Treasury Department issued a final ruling on transparency and coverage requirements on group health insurance plans. And so I was going to speak just slightly on that today to go along with part of what we're going through with COVID. And so as counties, you are also providing health benefits to your employees. So as the next slide shows, we currently are under what the Trump administration has passed on to us as the final rule on healthcare transparency. The initial intent was to help reduce healthcare costs by introducing greater price disclosure to influence consumer behavior and drive competition. And the hope was that it may help healthcare consumers identify the cost of non-emergency services they are purchasing and how their out-of-pocket costs will be affected. The provisions only apply to non-grandfathered coverage for both insured and self-funded group health plans. And historically, this information has been difficult for plan participants to find, making the consumer-directed plans design much less effective. More importantly, balanced billing and surprise billing issues have taken center stage politically in the last few years. So the transparency push is one aspect to address those concerns. And all these together as part of the Trump administration's push to affect healthcare costs. These new regulations are designed, pardon me, to operate in tandem with regulations issued in final form a few months ago aimed at the hospital industry to make the cost of hospital services transparent. They will require the health plans to provide cost-sharing information upon request to plan enrollees and other authorized representatives, including an estimate of the individual's cost-sharing liability for covered items for services furnished by specific providers. On slide 3, we go through with what the ruling requires. The ruling is going to require detailed pricing information be made public for plan years beginning on or after January 1st of 2022. And a list of 500 shoppable services must be available via the internet-based self-service tool on paper if requested for plan years beginning after January of 2023. The remainder of all items and services is required for plan years beginning on or after 2024. Plans will be required to disclose on a public website their network, billed charges, and allowed amounts for paid for out-of-network providers. The full initial list of 500 items and services is included in the regulations, and this list was developed by the agencies based on information they feel is already available and will include things such as mammography, prostate cancer screenings, knee replacements, skin tag removals, and those kinds of surgeries that they consider to be routine, and also office visits. On slide 4, we show that the rules and regulations are going to be quite onerous to the employers, and that's part of why we wanted to bring it up to you today. Is really, right now, the ultimate responsibility will lie on the employer. It's up to you as the employer to make sure it's compliant. However, you are unlikely to have this required information, nor do you have any control over it. So once again, the position is going to be that you're in charge. You must make sure your plans are compliant. And so by necessity, you will have to rely on the carriers, insurance companies, or the TPAs to carry out this process. This will allow the third parties to meet these obligations on your behalf, but not to shift the ultimate liability. On slide 5, we show that the regulations do not explicitly state the penalties for violation of the new rules. And so therefore, what should you do now? The rule does not go into effect before plan years beginning in 2022. And between now and then, plan sponsors will want to begin negotiating the responsibilities for fulfilling various disclosure obligations through contractual language with your insurers and your TPAs. In general, the plans are going to be required to meet this regulation. And as far as how they're going to police it, we don't yet know. We believe it will follow along with the healthcare acts, and that it'll be potentially covered through maybe any other of your fiduciary responsibilities. So once again, the impact to the employer and individual costs while health insurance is concerned will likely be affected, as this will definitely create additional layers of delivering health insurance coverage to your employees. So at the end of the day, it's not meant to cause anybody any additional heartburn or to be upsetting, but more so that you're aware. And this makes it more important than ever that you have partners that you can trust and that can also act as an additional consultation and help where you need as far as delivering healthcare to your employers. So here at LP Insurance Services, we assist our clients with negotiating any new legislation and making sure that you are compliant while at the same time providing the best possible options for your employees. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Trinity. We do appreciate you and LP Insurance, again, for your support in Nevada's counties and all that you do with LP. We do appreciate that. So let's jump into our first speaker this morning. He is, without doubt, one of the best leaders that the counties have across the nation. He is a tireless advocate for what we do at the counties. Our first speaker this morning, I'm happy to announce, is Executive Director of the National Association of Counties, Matt Chase. We're honored to have Matt with us this morning to provide us an update from Washington, D.C. and how things are going in our nation's capital. I'd also like to acknowledge the National Association of Counties. I've been involved at the national level for a few years and serve on the National Association's Transportation Steering Committee. I want to let everyone know how important they are to our organization and as an organization. We want to thank them for all their work they do on behalf of counties across the nation and at the national level. They really have a great staff. They are probably the most welcoming and helpful people for every walk of life, whether you're a commissioner-elect, staff, tenured commissioner, or even staff on the Hill with members and representatives of Congress. They do a tremendous job with what they do, as well as supporting counties through education, information, and different services. So we want to thank Matt, and we're glad that you can join us today here at our virtual conference. It's a great honor to have you. Matt is also someone who's very engaged on Capitol Hill. He really knows what's going on, and that's why we thought it would be great to have him come and provide us an insider's perspective from him in regards to what's happening in Washington, D.C. Matt has served as the CEO and director of the National Association of Counties, or NACo, since 2012. That was founded in 1935. NACo is the only national association representing America's 3,069 county governments. As the Chief Executive Officer of NACo, Matt provides executive leadership and oversight to the association's nearly 100 employees. During his tenure at the county at NACo, the association has launched several different initiatives, significant initiatives, including the county's Future Lab, Stepping Up campaign to address the intersection of mental illness and jails, Data-Driven Justice Initiative to address high-frequency utilizers of county services, and the Harvard NACo County Executives Forum. He's expanded the association's civic education partnership with iCivics to educate our nation's school children about the importance of county governments. In addition, he's guided efforts to develop and launch the County Explorer website with more than 600 county data sets, including county economy trackers, and multiple different information along with that. Previously, Matt served nearly a decade as executive director as a National Association of Development, or NADO, which he represents local government-based organizations, regional planning and development organizations. Matt began his career with the Professional Managers Association, serving a membership services director and chief operating officer. During his professional career, Matt has focused on promoting America's community and economic competitiveness, strengthening the intergovernmental cooperation and federal, state, local officials, engaging local government officials in federal policy-making process. Matt does an awesome job as a leader for the National Association. We will take some questions at the end of his remarks prior to the introduction of our final speaker this morning, Guy Hobbs. But Matt, welcome. It's good to see you as always. Thank you for joining us from Washington, D.C. It's always nice to see you here.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Lucy. It's really an honor to be here. I want to congratulate you on being the incumbent president of the Nevada Association of Counties. I want to thank Commissioner French for his great leadership, as well as Chair Marilyn Kirkpatrick The one edit I would make to the Nevada NACo We Are Counties video is I would have liked to see Marilyn getting her COVID test. That would have added a little spice to the video, but staff did a great job on producing that. So I want to thank the Nevada counties. You're a 100% membership state in NACo. We really, truly value your participation. America's counties are the owners of the National Association. As staff, we are just the stewards, and so we really want to thank you. I also want a huge shout out to Dagny Sableton, who is just an exceptional leader and just a great partner. So watch what her and her small, mighty team are doing to help service you on all your different issues, but in particular to watch the leadership that your state association has played with the Treasury Coronavirus Relief Fund, helping navigate FEMA's regulations, and just a host of different federal issues that are going on, in addition to the traditional issues that we always partner on, whether it's infrastructure, public lands, and the many other issues that you deal with. What I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about the 2020 U.S. elections. I call it the elections that will never end. And I will talk a little bit about the lame duck Congress and what really the outlook is for county issues. I did provide the State Association with these slides, so I'll go pretty quickly through them. But when we say that it was a split decision, there was this expectation that there would be a blue wave. And at the end of the day, what we really did see was a divided nation. We saw the presidency probably flipping. It's not quite official yet. The president would need basically recounts to reverse elections in 3 key states, probably Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia. That would be very challenging. There's always the possibility, but it does look like we will have President-elect Biden as the next leader. The U.S. Senate right now is 50 seats for the Republicans, 48 for the Democrats, with 2 outstanding runoffs in the state of Georgia. In the state of Georgia, for federal elections, a candidate must get over 50% of the vote. And so if nobody does, you have to have a runoff. And in this case, we have a really unique situation with 2 U.S. Senate seats in the state of Georgia heading to a runoff. One was a special election and one was a traditional seat. The U.S. House, the experts thought that Democrats were going to pick up 5 to 20 seats. So far, it looks like Republicans have picked up about 11 seats. And I say so far because we still have about 7 seats that are outstanding. There was only 1 flip of a gubernatorial seat this year. That was in Montana, and I'll talk about that later. And the state legislatures, after a 2-year cycle of off-year elections in 2020, they actually remained at deadlock of which party controlled them at the end of the election. In summary, what we really see is immense divide on American values. You kind of have 2 sets of values per party, and then people in the middle who are kind of this swing. We saw a record turnout, democracy in action. Again, I talked about a split decision. What we really saw were late deciders, those folks who didn't know which way they were going to vote about 14 days out from the election. When they went to cast their ballot, the vast majority actually went for the Republicans, which helped them retain a lot of the toss-up congressional seats. And we saw a lot of localized performance of mail-in ballots. In some states, they leaned towards the Democrats. In some states, they leaned towards the Republican. It even varied county by county. And what we do see coming out of this election is both major political parties face intense internal battles about which direction are these 2 big tents, these 2 big umbrella parties going to go in. Leading into the election, this was obviously an historic election. If you looked at super disruptors that can kind of be these October surprises, recessions, Supreme Court vacancies, wars, pandemics, other things, social unrest, this year was one of only 2 years since 1900 where you actually had 4 super disruptors coming into an election. The other thing that we're seeing is 85% of Americans, or adult Americans, seem to disagree on facts. And it's often divided by which news outlet you look at. But it's very tough for all of you to govern at the local level when we can't even agree on truly what are facts. The polling goes deep. I'm not going to go too far into it. I think you all live it every single day, but it is a challenge at the federal, state, and local level as we move forward. The big items for this election really were, is it about the economy or is it about COVID? And what you saw, it was really split. And it really depended on where you lived. And I'll get into that in a second. Again, I will provide these slides to Dagny and her team, so you don't have to jot notes, you can check it out later. But the issues remain very intense. And when we kind of look at it, we summed it up to the 75 million Americans who voted for the president-elect. It was really about COVID. It was about the disapproval of the president's handling of COVID. It was exhaustion with drama. They kind of view President Biden or President-elect Biden as a traditional safe choice. And then for the base of the party, they have a vision for certain priorities like healthcare, social justice, and others. On the flip side, you had 72 million Americans voting for President Trump. The slogan could be, it's the economy, stupid. They're worried about the hollowing out of the middle class. There's fear of being left behind in the new economy, whether it's post-COVID or even with globalization. There's a ton of anger about political correctness and elitism. And there's profound disagreements with the term or the future potential direction with socialism. So if you looked at the two camps, that's kind of how it breaks down. When you look at the economy, it's pretty clear why we have these two emerging Americas. If you lived in a congressional district represented by a House Republican, the average wages in your community has gone down 3% in the last 10 years. If you live in a congressional district represented by a House Democrat, the average wages in your community have gone up 13%. So again, you can see why the economy played such a huge role in the Republican turnout, among many other factors, but certainly the economy is a key issue. We should all celebrate that this was a historic turnout. We had record turnout for both candidates actually received the most number of votes by a candidate for president of the United States in our nation's history. Joe Biden being number one, President Trump being number two in the same election. That's something that we should celebrate as a country to see democracy in action. When you look at the turnout, it was pretty much widespread that the turnout was massive across the country. In upstate New York, that will probably change because of the mail-in ballots and some of the slowness of being able to process some of those. But I also want to applaud our nation's counties who run most of the elections at the local level. You help coordinate about 800,000 poll workers each year, each election cycle. And to deal with this record turnout during COVID should really be celebrated. We realize there were challenges, some of it created by state law and policy, some of it changes in technology, some of it the challenges of getting volunteers during COVID, but we should really celebrate as a community how this election was handled. You can see the concentration of votes. What I love about your state association is how the urban and rural counties work together, that you don't look at this through urban and rural, Democrat, Republican. You all come to your state association through your responsibilities as county officials, and that is just great to see. But nationally, you can clearly see the continued concentration of party support in the rural areas and in the urban areas. What we found with this election was every vote mattered. For anybody to say, I'm not going to vote, my vote didn't matter, it truly does. I mean, we are seeing some of these House races being decided by less than 50 votes, an incredibly small margin. We saw it even at the presidential level with these really tight margins below a couple thousand votes. So what happened is Joe Biden started the election with an advantage. The states that he was likely to win, he started with enough electoral votes. President Trump was going to have to win not only the toss-up states, but he was going to have to pick off a couple of these states from the lean Democrat. His campaign and he himself did a phenomenal job of winning all the toss-ups. They just weren't able so far to turn enough of the lean Democratic states. So, what is our summary of the election? Well, it really mattered to voters. People really cared. When you looked at the polling, it was off the charts that people thought that their candidate had to win or the country was going in the wrong direction. Razor thin margins. There's fewer and fewer swing voters to capture. What was really impressive with the Trump campaign was how they really micro-targeted. If you look along the Texas border, for example, they flipped several traditional Democratic counties to go their way. They really closed the margins in Miami-Dade. But it doesn't appear to have been enough, but still incredibly impressive to watch what they did. Americans chose divided government between the Congress and the White House. President-elect Biden really didn't have any coattails at the congressional level or at the state legislative level. And again, it boiled down to this kind of COVID versus the economy versus personalities. One interesting note is with the Hispanic vote, particularly here in Washington with national media, folks kind of talk about Hispanics as if they're a monolithic voting group. You saw a very different performance from Hispanics in Arizona versus South Florida versus the Midwest versus even California. Very different cultures within that community, very different priorities. And of course, the economy matters on where people live. Moving to the US House, we still have about 7 races still close to call. They're being called here and there. The magic number to control the US House is 218 votes. So far, the Democrats are confirmed for about 221 votes. The Republicans are at 207. So you can tell incredibly slim governing majority for the Democrats. When you look at the races, the Republicans totally outperformed the Democrats in these toss-up seats. A lot of these were seats that swung to the Democrats in 2018 in the midterm elections, and the Republicans were able to recapture them. Where they really were successful was in the more exurban or rural areas. The other things that the Republicans put a huge emphasis on this cycle was they went and recruited a phenomenal class of women and minorities, which was very different from the 2018 cycle. So at least half of the 40 plus new freshman class on the Republican side will be women and or minorities. So look ahead already 2 years. It's going to be an interesting 2 years for the US House. Again, the Democrats retained the House, especially with competitive suburban districts. The Republicans gained in the low-hanging fruit, their former seats that they controlled, particularly in the exurban and rural. The midterm elections are traditionally not friendly to the party that controls the White House, with an average loss of about 27 seats since the end of World War II. And what is really important to note is that Republicans will control redistricting in about 2/5, or for about 2/5 of all US seats. Democrats will control redistricting through the states for about only 1/10 of US House seats, and the remaining will be led by kind of independent redistricting commissions. When we look at the US Senate, again, there was projections that the Democrats had an outside shot at taking over control. We still have to wait and see what happens with these 2 runoffs in Georgia. Right now, it's 50 Republicans, 48 Democrats, including 2 independents that caucus with the Democrats. And so we'll have to see. But so far, the Republicans have won all of the toss-up races that truly were a coin flip heading into the election. And when you see the margins, these were considered toss-ups, yet the Republicans won by 7, 8, 10%. The closest one being North Carolina at about 1.7%. So they didn't really turn out to be that competitive as compared to what people thought. Looking ahead to 2022 already, this is an amazing statistic. I mean, when I came to Washington almost 30 years ago, the upper Midwest was all represented by Democrats. Today, there's only 3 Senate Democrats that remain in, quote, red states. Senator John Tester from Montana, Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia, and Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer from New York also has a very challenging re-election campaign in 2022. He's really watching his left flank. And so it'll be interesting to see how he tries to compromise on a bunch of issues. On the Senate side, we now only have one Senate Republican who, quote, remains in a blue state, Senator Collins, who actually just won re-election, and she outperformed President Trump by 7%. A huge ticket splitting in this environment. You had two vulnerable Republicans, Senator Pat Toomey and Senator Ron Johnson, who decided to retire. Their states are tilting blue, and Senator Richard Burr from North Carolina is also going to be retiring. The Senate Republicans are going to need to raise a lot of money. The seats that they're defending tend to be in very expensive states like Ohio, Florida, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. But the thing that the Republicans have going for them in 2022 is their party's turnout is typically stronger in the midterms. But Democrats really won't have too many competitive seats to defend. Senator Hassan from New Hampshire probably has the most at-risk seat. Again, I mentioned earlier, the governors all stayed with the same party, except for Montana went from Democrat to Republican. In the state legislatures, very little change. The two chambers in the New Hampshire state legislature switched. Pretty much all the other ones stayed the same. What is amazing is that Minnesota remains the only state legislature with divided party control of their two chambers. That still is just stunning and just shows how parties are dominating their states. As I mentioned earlier, the Republicans are expected to control redistricting for about 2/5 of all U.S. House seats. Democrats can only direct the boundaries in about 1/10.
Matt, I think we lost you. 1 sec, Matt.
Yep.
Okay. We lost you right when you started speaking about the redistricting, if you want to go back there.
Okay. Yeah, I mentioned this earlier, but the Republicans, one of the biggest victories out of this 2020 election is that they will control the congressional redistricting process in about 2/5 of all U.S. House seats. Democrats will only control about 1/10 of the U.S. House seats when they draw the boundaries. The rest will be by independent commissions. And so if you're a Republican, this was a major, major victory. What I'd like to do, just kind of wrapping up in here, hopefully in 5 minutes, is to talk about our broader policy agenda. We're obviously working on the COVID relief project, COVID relief packages, trying to make sure that if Congress provides more aid for state and local governments, that counties get our fair share, that we have appropriate guardrails, but not third rails in how you can use the money. And we want to minimize state control over how counties can spend that money. We have a full agenda with public lands. We launched a broadband task force. We're working on a whole slew of regulations, infrastructure. We're trying to get Congress to change what's called the Medicaid inmate exclusion policy, where you lose your federal benefits at arrest, not post-adjudication. So we just have our continued priorities. With COVID, what we are really focused on is representing the county voice in this intergovernmental partnership. Really explaining to people the role that counties play in public health and mental health and substance abuse with 911 systems. We've even had to explain to members of Congress and staff, what is a coroner? What is a medical examiner? I joke, I always used to explain coroner as Quincy. And I noticed all these young Hill staff would look at me like, who is Quincy? So now I got to talk about CSI Miami or some of these more modern TV shows. But people just, they don't even know, no offense to them, but they're not even fully aware of the county role. And so our job is to tell the county story. And I want to applaud your state association for partnering with us on the We Are Counties. We have to tell our story that when we talk to federal policymakers, we're not there as partisans. We're there as representatives of county government. We want to explain to people that counties employ over 1% of all Americans actually work for county government. Through our 1,000 hospitals, our 800 nursing homes, through our fire protection, our law enforcement, human services, you know the list. But it really is mind-boggling that 1% of Americans are employed by county government, and yet so few people actually understand what we do. So what we are trying to do is say, whatever the House and Senate and the White House come up with a COVID package, whatever dollar amount they pick, which is above our pay grade, what we want to make sure is if they allocate money to state and local governments, that counties get direct, flexible money, that you're allowed to use it for lost revenue, that you have reasonable, practical safeguards. We don't want this money to be used for long-term structural budget issues and pensions. We want it to be used for COVID-impacted relief, both public health as well as the economic and social impacts. What we're really trying to explain to Congress is, yes, every county has a different revenue stream. We need to explain to folks that in states like yours, if you're Clark County and you rely on tourism and you lose those sales tax and those hotel receipts, it's a huge, huge impact. Even if they have a large rainy day fund, it's never enough for a situation like this. So we want to be reasonable, and we're just asking for an appropriate formula that recognizes the important roles that you play at the local level. What has really changed in recent weeks is we helped form a coalition called COVID Relief Now, which is actually led by the lodging industry, the hotels, the retail federation, manufacturers, coming together with the governors, the counties, and the cities and saying, we want to build a public-private partnership to advocate for additional COVID relief. And that the business community has recognized that counties are great partners to distribute federal money down to the local level to ensure that every community has access based on their need. So there's many scenarios that can happen. It doesn't look likely that something will get done in the next couple of weeks. We are going to continue to push, and we just want to keep telling our story. We encourage you to check out our Coronavirus Relief Fund Hub. We have best practices, we have federal policy analysis. There's all sorts of resources in there for you. So I just want to end with just this concept of resilience, that for many years we've talked that 25% of all counties face a disaster, a natural disaster that rises to the level of a FEMA presidential disaster declaration. And we typically think about resilience through a disaster lens. But with this pandemic and with the nature of how it's hitting our economies and our communities, we really need to be prepared. How I've been describing COVID to people is that it's like a large earthquake. And we saw some signals early that this was coming. We didn't know the scale of it. We've been kind of surprised as a globe and as a nation at just how traumatic it's been. But I think as county leaders, we need to be prepared for the aftershocks. Some of these aftershocks are very predictable, like in an earthquake, and some of them are unknown, and they just happen spontaneously. But we should expect to see trauma with our kids. We should see trauma with people who've been unemployed. And we're just going to have to prepare as a community how counties are going to help lead our communities. But we shouldn't be surprised by anything at this point in our lives. So that's why we have partnered with General Colin Powell on our High Performance Leadership Academy. We're offering a free scholarship to every county in the country to go through. We want to bring positive leadership to county governments, and we encourage you to take advantage of it. So Dagny and Commissioner Lucy, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate the partnership, and hopefully we have time for some dialogue. Apologize for going a little long.
Matt, thank you so much. Thanks for the great presentation and all the information and all of your hard work. We do have a question coming in. I'd encourage anybody, if you're an attendee, to pose your questions through the Zoom question and answer function right at the bottom of your screen. And first question is from Commissioner Lister from Lincoln County. Can you speak to the 95-5 divide in Washington, D.C. and how it affects policy? Also comments on something similar in Nevada, where 15 out of the 17 counties voted overwhelmingly one way versus the other, and our electoral votes reflect something different in terms of the way the state goes. And so any thoughts you have on that, Matt?
Yeah, I think we have to have realistic expectations about what can get done. From a National Association of Counties perspective, we are focusing on very practical, real-world issues. And we are really pushing bipartisan support. When we push bills, we really work hard to get bipartisan congressional support. For example, we've launched this broadband task force. You know, if the country can't come together on broadband, we're in trouble. We have underserved communities, whether they're urban, suburban, or rural. And, you know, if you're not connected, you can't compete. So we're really pushing people to put aside their partisan differences and say, we need a strategy on broadband, including with the private sector, including with rural electric co-ops and others. So I think we just have to have realistic expectations about what can get done. I still think we can continue to get funding for payment in lieu of taxes and secure rural schools. That's become increasingly bipartisan. I still think we can get an infrastructure package through at some point. And we're going to continue to push this issue of the Medicaid inmate exclusion issue, where counties are paying for healthcare costs unnecessarily for your inmates pre-adjudication. So, you know, the big picture issues, there's going to continue to be a divide. But what we want to do is kind of work below the surface and work on those practical issues and just keep pushing.
Matt, thanks for that. Sort of to that point, in terms of working really on the nonpartisan priorities the counties have in terms of the services we provide and what we do, and sort of getting some of that on the ground stuff and on the ground policy priorities done in Washington, D.C. One thing that we see here in Nevada is that so many of our elected officials at the state level don't come up through county government. There's very few. And so we are constantly doing education, the We Are Counties campaign, talking about what we do. We do that all the time at our legislature in Nevada, just to try to educate, as you were saying, you know, what's a coroner and what do they do, and to let folks know that that's a county function. And I know that you do that too in Washington, D.C. How has it changed, or maybe it hasn't, or sort of what's the status of representatives in Congress with local government county backgrounds? Do you see more or less of those folks? And thanks.
Yeah, Dan, great question. So I would say three quick things. One, we actually just helped form a local government caucus in the U.S. House. We have about 80 members of the U.S. House and Senate who are former county officials. In fact, you know, the president-elect Joe Biden and the vice president-elect Kamala Harris both were county officials. Joe Biden started as a county commissioner before he went to the U.S. Senate. And Kamala Harris was the elected district attorney for San Francisco City County. So we're really using that. In the Congress, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell started as a county judge executive. He was a NACo member in the 1970s, and we remind him of that all the time. But what we have done is gotten the bipartisan group of former county officials together to say, help us educate your peers. So that's number one. That's going to be launched in January. Number two is NACo is actually sponsoring the Congressional Management Foundation this year as part of the freshman orientation program for the House. So as those new House members go through the orientation, NACo will actually be one of the sponsors of that program. And then third, our legislative team will work with the state associations and individual commissioners to actually go visit every single freshman member. 2 years ago, we did 112 visits of new members of Congress. Our philosophy is you want to go meet them when they're up in the 5th floor of the Cannon House office building, but there's only one elevator to get up to that attic. That's when you want to get to know these people, when they're before their committee chair or subcommittee chair. Get them when they're fresh. And so, you know, we just got to be persistent, and we got to be fact-based in this environment. And we go in there with the attitude of, Congressman or Senator, how can we help you? What are your priorities as an elected official What are you trying to accomplish? And then we tell them what we're trying to accomplish and say, how can we create a win-win? But we always start every conversation with, as part of your election and your promise back to your constituents, what did you say? And we look for the overlap in our agenda, and we kind of go from there. So you start with, what do we agree on, rather than what do we disagree on?
Thank you. We have time for one more question. I'll pose one while we're waiting. We've got a lot of folks watching today, so if any of you guys have any questions for Matt, please write that out in the question and answer function in Zoom. We can pose your question. So while we're waiting to see if our attendees have any other questions, I'll pose one more to you, and I want to start with thanking the National Association of Counties for all the work that you did on the CARES Act and on the COVID legislation that's been passed so far. We work very closely with the National Association in support of that, especially the funding and grants that have come to counties. It's been really important for counties in Nevada, those dollars, and the resources you've provided in support of using those dollars, and also in terms of what's going on Capitol Hill for that legislation has been really fantastic. So thank you. We know your work continues on another future COVID package. In addition to that, though, are there any county issues, federal issues that affect counties that you see where there might be opportunities to really get something done in the next Congress with the next administration? You mentioned some of the ones that you guys are always working on that we care about here in Nevada, including PILT and the Medicaid exclusion. Are there any where you think there might be an opportunity to really get some work done next year?
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying this for 20 years, but infrastructure remains an opportunity, and I think broadband. I want to make one closing comment, Dagny, on the COVID aid. That, you know, some people were not happy with NACo's position on calling for more state and local aid. And we've been very careful to try and not put a dollar amount, but I want to provide some context. When we were in the spring and going into the early summer, when they were negotiating the last package that ultimately passed, there was going to be $150 billion for state and local governments. It did not end up in the final package, but the House and Senate Democratic leadership was pushing $150 billion for state and local governments. Most of it at the get-go was going to go to the governors. Of the money that was set aside for local governments, 69% was going to go to cities, 17% was going to go to counties, and the remaining allocation was going to be up to the governor to award to counties and municipalities in the state. That's when NACo stepped in very, very forcefully and said, this is unacceptable to us. The roles that counties play in public health, overall health, social services, jails as a hot spot for COVID, you know, the laundry list that we already talked about of your roles and responsibilities. And no offense to our city partners, but for them to get 69% of the state and local allocation on the local side was not appropriate in our view. And that's why you saw us working very closely with Speaker Pelosi, Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. We showed them the data. We worked with them to totally rewrite their bill, where cities and counties now share 50% of the money. The city money would be allocated through a HUD CDBG type formula, and the county share would be allocated based on population with a minimum per county. But I just want to be clear to people that our job is to fight for counties. If folks wanted to see cities get more money, I mean, that's their prerogative. But we thought we should really get in the trenches, articulate our purpose, and to make sure that there was a fair formula that respected and acknowledged the role that counties play, not only in COVID as a health issue, but the broader economic issues that we're dealing with. So just wanted to highlight that.
Dagny, if I may, can I pose a question at this point?
Yeah, Chair Lucy, please go ahead.
Matt, as we move through this, and I think this is a kind of coattails of what Commissioner Lister had brought up in his earlier conversation. As you know, Nevada is represented by 17 counties. 2 of those counties are very urban, and the other 15 are rural in nature. As we sit as a very different in demographics of our state, you know, a lot of the issues when we work with Congressman Amodei and all of our state delegation, a lot of the discussions that we've had as it pertains to public lands, mineral right issues, different things of that nature, when we talk to members of Congress, they don't really understand the issues on the Western United States because so many of our representatives come from the Eastern Seaboard. And so as you're talking about this education to these new freshman classes of members of Congress, whether Senate or Senate or House, how do we go effectively educate some of those members from the state of Nevada about those issues that are so important to us? As you've seen, BLM issues are tremendously important to us. Department of Interior issues are very important to us. Wildland fire, Division of Forestry, those types of issues that maybe a Congress member or a member of Congress wouldn't understand had they not really been on ground.
Commissioner Lucy, thank you. I mean, that's just an incredibly thoughtful question, and it's something we think about every day. Unfortunately, you know, when the congressional rules changed a couple of years ago, it made it more difficult. But for counties, we can actually pay for congressional travel and congressional staff travel. We're not considered lobbyists. We're an intergovernmental partner. And why I bring it up is I think we have to get these congressional staff and these Eastern members out west. And I don't mean just go to Burning Man. We need to get them out there to see the landscape after a forest fire. I can tell you, we watched Senator Cantwell from the state of Washington, Senator Feinstein from the state of California, really pivot about 4 years ago on wildfire mitigation. They started to work across the aisle. Now, these were Western members, but they tended to really be dominated by kind of more environmental agenda and just leave the forests as they are. And they finally went out into their state and saw firsthand what is happening. I think we have to get out and show people your communities. To explain to people after a forest fire that the land is as hard as marble, and when it rains, it takes 1/4 of an inch of rain to get massive flooding. For people here in DC, it's hard to understand until you see it. So I think the trick is going to be, how can we get people out of the Beltway, to get on an airplane, maybe post-COVID, and literally go walk your communities, get out in the forest. The Utah Association of Counties does this every year. They have an ATV ride. And in a 6-county area, they work with one of their council of governments, and they bring congressional staff and members of Congress. They even had Gold Senator Orrin Hatch when he was there up on a 4-wheeler up on the top of a mountain. He almost got struck by lightning, by the way. But, you know, even your own delegation, getting them out there beyond, you know, the ribbon cuttings, and go out and get a little dirty and get into the forest or the landscape and see it. I think that's the only way you're going to personalize it.
Matt, thank you so much. Thanks so much for speaking.
Thanks
for those thoughtful answers. I'm going to turn it back over to Commissioner Lucy. I know he's going to want to say thanks as well.
Thank you.
Matt, it's always great to see you. We do really appreciate you taking time this morning, and thank you for your willingness to be here and participate, and for all your work on behalf of the nation, Nevada, and all counties across this great nation. So thank you, and we really do appreciate your time.
Thank you. And
great day.
It's hard to believe we were in Clark County just a couple of, 18 months ago. It feels like 10 years ago.
Isn't it crazy how things change so rapidly?
Thank you again.
Thanks, Matt. Good seeing you. Well, next, I would like to take a moment and move on to our next speaker, our second speaker of the morning. This individual is a tireless advocate for the state of Nevada, and I will go through his bio here quickly. But I want to take a minute to, we're excited to have him here, Guy Hobbs. He's going to provide us with a economic forecast specifically tailored to Nevada counties. Guy is tremendous. Guy has been an advocate for associations, legislation, counties, cities across our great state for the last 20, 30, 40 years, I would say, Guy, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm going to get into Guy's bio here really quick. Guy is really the perfect person to do this for us this morning. He has got more than 40 years of experience, which includes financial advisory services, tax policy, administration, budget and capital planning strategies, economic and fiscal analysis, debt management, sports and entertainment project support, and operations research. He also has a significant experience working with the state legislature and multiple units of regional and local government. He founded Hobbs Associates, Inc. in 1996 and serves as the president and managing director of that firm. Mr. Hobbs has been actively involved in the technical resource involved as a technical resource in the Nevada State Legislature for nearly 4 decades now. He served on the Legislative Commission's subcommittee to study laws relating to finance of infrastructure which accompany development, and the subcommittee studying laws relating to distribution among local governments of revenue from state and local taxes. And in 2002, Mr. Hobbs was appointed by the Governor Kenny Gwinn to chair the governor's task force on tax policy in Nevada. Can't have somebody who understands taxes better than Mr. Hobbs. So, in 2019, Mr. Hobbs was appointed to the Commission of School Funding to establish by SB 543 on the 2019 legislative session and serves currently as the Vice Chairman. Mr. Hobbs' background also includes several years of teaching experience on behalf of the College of Business and Economics at UNLV and 13 years of experience as a Chief Financial Officer for Clark County. Mr. Hobbs has earned a BA in Business and Economics from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and an MBA from UNLV. And also, Mr. Hobbs has played a significant role in the COVID-19 response for the state in regards to helping write policy along with the LEAP team to make sure that we brought certain things back forward. So with that, Mr. Guy Hobbs, thank you for joining us this morning. We really are honored to have you with us. And sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Lucy, for such a nice introduction. I really do appreciate that. And to Dagny and her staff for the opportunity to be a part of this program with you all. As Commissioner Lucy mentioned, I reflect back to my earliest years with working with NACo during the early 1980s. So to say it was 40 years ago, it's hard to believe, but it certainly has been. And I've always had a very hearty respect and affection for this organization and all of the amazing things that it does. So again, very happy to be here, and thank you so much for that opportunity. And I will go ahead and try to share my screen. And if I have any problems doing that, I'm sure there'll be help there, or I can go find an 8-year-old maybe to help me do this. Let's see here. Is it working?
It looks
Okay.
good.
Thank you very much. I'm going to roll through some information. Much of the focus of this will have to do with the state as a whole. And there's certainly reasons for looking at that. We will get into some more granular information about some of the urban counties as well as the rurals. But I think having a foundation in at least an understanding of what the state is going through and where we see things going in the future is extraordinarily important for each county, because as the state goes, given the fact that we have very similar tax and revenue structures, the local governments will also go. So one of the things that we often talk about with respect to what we're going through right now is we really don't have just one problem. We have certainly a public health crisis that began the first part of the year. And it's hard. I know it's hard for all of us to believe that it's almost been a year of having to deal with this, but that public health crisis certainly gave rise to an immediate economic crisis in the state. the economic crisis gave rise to fiscal strain almost immediately and in an unprecedented way at the state and local level. And some things that we really haven't seen much of yet, but I know will be a part of the landscape for years to come, will be the legal phase of the crisis. I expect we'll be dealing with that one for many, many years to come. And an ongoing social crisis. I mean, you can't have a fiscal crisis without it manifesting itself on the social side. But part of that I'll get into a little bit later is where all of that may be leading us into the future. But I want to spend time talking about some of the economic fundamentals, and I'll try to roll through these as quickly as I can. Those deal with obviously public health, employment, the fiscal side of the equation, consumer spending, which is an extraordinarily important thing for all of us to be mindful of, because that's what feeds a consolidated tax and other funding sources for us. Housing is always a question mark during times like this, and tourism, particularly in a couple of our counties. But the fact of the matter is how things go in a couple of our counties have to do with the health and well-being from a fiscal standpoint of the state as a whole. So we'll start with some comments about the public health elements first. And these are things I know that you're likely covering in other sections of the program that began yesterday and we'll continue to talk more about later today. But it's worth pointing out. If you look at our 3-day moving average as a state, you all know what the patterns are. On the right side of this, you see the United States. On the left side, you see the state of Nevada. We've included some milestone moments as a point of reference. You'll see back in April, the stay-at-home order, then a flattening out of the cases, reopenings beginning in June, a rise in the cases, and then a decline beginning in the early part of August, leading down to a low point in September, and then a rise that continues to this day. And this is just another look, instead of orienting it toward milestone decision points, different holidays to give it a time context. And from a positivity rate standpoint, this is one of the things that's being very closely monitored these days. Again, you can see that after the month of March, we had a decline in positivity. This is a difficult statistic to get your arms around because positivity percentages have as much to do with how many tests are being given as they do with how many tests are positive. But we're currently on an increase again, and beyond the time frame which we showed, which is the end of October, that positivity rate is continued. So the point of this is that the problem has hardly gone away, and we're quite a ways away from the goal point of closer to 5%. On the other side of the equation, and not to say that this is a piece of good news, but I suppose it's better news than bad. The amount of recoveries that we've seen in the state are tremendously high, both in terms of raw numbers and as a percentage of the total. It's really the darker part of the bar that you're trying to manage at this point, because those are the still active cases, and you'd certainly rather see that darker part of the bar get smaller over time. And 88.5% of the COVID cases that have been reported have resulted in recoveries, and some percentages above that are still cases that are in effect at this time. Moving to employment for a moment, we see the normal Nevada employment numbers for the past 20 years. And as you get out to the right, which I can't see on my particular screen, but you see a very precipitous drop off on the right side that should look familiar to a lot of people as being a product of the public health crisis. And we compare that to, this is one of the interesting things about doing the type of work that we do. A lot of the modeling is based on things that have happened in the past. And as you look at that time frame that covered the Great Recession, it looks nothing like and feels nothing like what we're going through right now. As this slide shows, during the Great Recession, the state of Nevada lost nearly 200,000 jobs over the course of 2.5 years. And with COVID-19, we lost well more than that in a matter of just a couple of months. This is unprecedented territory for us to be in. This is another slide that I actually think is a very interesting one, because if you look at the Great Recession, which is in the middle of that slide, the dark bars going down below the zero line, you'll see the nice shape of that curve. That's the normal bell-shaped curve type of recession. If you go over to the left, you'll also see a recession spanning 2001, 2002 timeframe, much milder, but still somewhat bell-shaped. And you go to the far right, and we haven't come up with a name for that shape yet. It's a dramatic drop-off, and then the question becomes, what is the trajectory of the recovery, and how long will that recovery period take? Whenever we measure these types of things, there are two focuses that we have. One is the depth of the recession, and we can certainly call what we're going through a recession, and the duration. Normally, it takes a while to build up to the point that we would call the depth of the recession. In the case of COVID, we hit that point right away. And what sectors of our economy were affected? This is a look from February through September in different sectors of our economy and the net employment growth change. Obviously and predictably, leisure and hospitality was the hardest hit. February, by the way, was prior to actually going into the closures. So this is a benchmark from February, which was pre-pandemic, to September, which is the most recent information that we have. And leisure and hospitality led the way. Certainly from your own county's perspective, as you look at this, you can be either thankful for the concentration of employment that you do have, or you can be empathetic if you happen to be heavier in some of those that you see at the top of this chart. On percentage terms, basically the same numbers restated. Notice at the bottom, mining and logging over that same period have done comparatively well. And I know some of our rural counties, that's certainly good news to them. Leisure and hospitality particularly affects Southern Nevada. And some of these others are spread out through different counties in different ways throughout the state. You talk about recovery within the employment market for a little bit. 164,000 jobs were recovered post Great Recession in a period of 68 months. In a period of 5 months following the initial downturn because of COVID, a similar number of jobs have been recovered just in 5 months. What we're looking for there is the point of stability. And as we go further into this today, I will talk a little bit more about some of our impressions about where we think we may be. And net employment growth, this is benchmarked from April, so this is from the low point of the impacts on employment. And you can see that leisure and hospitality at the very bottom has come back quite a bit, but still on a net basis. And I have a slide that'll show that is still not where we would obviously like it to be. Not many of these are. Percentage changes, same thing demonstrated largely. And if you look at different parts of the state, what have the employment changes been from the start of this recession to more current times? And you can see the green line, which has the deepest drop, that's Southern Nevada and Clark County. The dark line in the middle is the state as a whole. And the light blue line represents Northern Nevada and other parts of the state. And certainly what this tells us is the greater reliance on leisure and hospitality in Southern Nevada led to greater declines. We've already pointed that out in some of the preceding slides. And those economies that are less dependent upon leisure and hospitality, or maybe in their own ways more diversified, were less impacted by a notable amount. I put this chart in there because it's just a very striking chart. Initial unemployment claims. If you go back over to the left side of this in the 08-09 timeframe, you can see a little bit of an uptick during the Great Recession. But when you compare that to what we went through during the first 2 or 3 months of the response to the pandemic, It's like nothing we've ever seen. And in the world of economic and financial modeling, things that you've never seen before are much more difficult to model than those things that are at least cyclically repetitive. This chart is in there just to make another point, as if I have to explain to any of you that things have been very difficult and challenging. The 30 highest weeks of initial unemployment claims. These bars each represent a week of the highest 30 weeks of initial unemployment claims in the state's history. And all but 4 of those have been during the response to the pandemic. Again, it just goes to the point that this problem is deep, it is wide, and it is significant. Unemployment insurance payments that have been made as in part to help deal with this, and I know that we will have a little bit more discussion as this presentation moves forward with respect to the impact of federal stimulus. I know that's a big part of your focus also during other parts of this conference, but a significant amount of money has been injected into the state to help offset some of those impacts of unemployment that we talked about a bit earlier. Again, this shows the pattern of unemployment insurance payments and concerns with respect to trust fund balances that have been drawn on quite heavily on a cumulative basis over that period to try to help people through the pandemic. And we'll get into a bit of the fiscal situation as well. On a national basis, I don't think it comes as any surprise that gross domestic product took a very, very large hit in the months following the onset of the pandemic. And if you look at Nevada compared to other states in the country, it's not that we're looking to lead the nation, certainly in a category like this, but as far as impact on overall gross domestic state product, we were among the hardest hit. I believe only Hawaii and Nevada could boast that at this point, and that's certainly something to do with the configuration of our economy. I'm going to see if I can actually move. Okay. The federal stimulus that's come into the state of Nevada since the onset of the pandemic and the passage of the CARES Act and some of the other acts that have been passed by Congress. About 12% of Nevada's pre-COVID gross domestic product. That is a huge, huge number. The decline in the gross domestic product for the state, $25.5 billion with federal stimulus offsets of about $21 billion. And these are the sources of funding that add up to the $21 billion. The largest portion of it comes from the CARES Act. And again, there are numerous other programs that have provided some funding that has made its way into and through Nevada. CARES Act being, again, the single largest piece. And these are programs that I'm sure most of you are generally familiar with. Largest part of it, $8.6 billion coming in the form of stimulus checks, unemployment insurance, and lost wages assistance. Another $4+ billion in paycheck protection support for small and other businesses, and over $1 billion in other coronavirus relief funds. One of the most interesting things to us in trying to understand what all of this means is what is the source of funds, what are the source of funds that are being used by Nevada households to meet their spending needs? And why this becomes such an important factor for us is, you know, it's one thing to estimate what the impact on the economy is going to be due to business closures, due to the loss of certain segments of visitation and other such things. It's a very difficult thing to put your finger on what the net impact is going to be once the consideration of some of the stimulus funds are taken into account. And the interesting thing here is that Spending by Nevada households, you can see the two green bars in the middle are from sources that normally are not available. And this is an indicator of the degree of reliance that households have had on some of the federal support that's been provided directly to those families, or through the state to those families, or through other governmental programs to those families. This is a shocking amount from our perspective. And again, the payroll protection program has certainly been a big part of it. It has covered a number of total jobs. I believe the total jobs amount to something like 430,000 jobs that have been covered through the PPP program. Lost Wages Assistance Program, $422 million, also provided for the state of Nevada. I want to get into a little bit more something that might directly relate to how you are viewing the impacts on your local budgets, as well as what we foresee some of the future to be. Disposable, and this again is to us, and probably only to us, an extraordinarily intriguing chart. U.S. disposable personal income. You can see during the recession, the grayed area in the middle, disposable income dropped off during the Great Recession. And it's dropped off a couple of other times since. You look at the far right side of this, which is mostly post-pandemic, and disposable personal income shoots through the roof. It's many, many times more at the level than we saw during the Great Recession. Actually 3 times the level that we witnessed during the Great Recession. That is an extraordinary value that took us a while to get our arms around. The question being, how could disposable income go up in an environment where you have business closures and the highest levels of unemployment that we've had in the state's history? This is that chart restated in quarterly terms. Again, you see on the far right side, personal income growth annualized way up over what normal conditions, pre-pandemic conditions would be in the 2015 to 2019 range, and particularly when you compare it to the effects during the recession. So what is causing this? I mean, clearly the thing that is causing disposable incomes to take such a dramatic uptick has been the injection of federal stimulus. In fact, the CARES Act alone increased personal incomes in Nevada by 15.6%, which is an extraordinary statistic in and of itself. And what have people been doing with this money? That's something else we've been trying to track. As you can well imagine, the gray line on the bottom represents travel, and less people clearly have been traveling during the pandemic. I don't think that anybody's booking a cruise at this moment. The darker line, restaurants, that's come back after the closures, which you see in the April to May period. That's come back a bit. Green is retail. That number, that has stayed rather steady as consumption has sort of leveled out. Home improvements, that's an interesting one to us, because I think with more time at home, more people telecommuting, more people having potentially been furloughed, a lot of those projects at home are now being done. And we'll have a chart later that will show some support for that contention. And amazingly, the yellow line is online retail spending. That has shot through the roof. And where you may see some declines in actual spending in certain other retail categories, it's been offset to some extent in all parts of the state by an increase in online purchases. This is another tracking of total retail sales. And again, I'm focusing on retail sales, and I'm probably going to go off script here in a couple of minutes to talk about it because of its importance, both to the state and to every local government in this state in terms of producing different types of revenues and being an indicator for other activities. But you can see on the far side of this chart, retail sales have been taking sort of a normal growth pattern from 2010, the end of the prior recession, through the time the pandemic hit. And then at that point took a deep dive, has recovered a bit, and is in the process of stabilizing at a different equilibrium. The total drop in sales from January through the low point that you see represented that the arrow is pointing to, a $1.4 billion drop in retail sales. Looked at a completely different way, retail sales per employee. This is an interesting one to look at as well. A decline in that. And this is another one of those things that we think is rather startling. Retail sales per employee during the Great Recession, if you look at August of 2011, $3,475 in per employee spending. On an inflation-adjusted basis, the spending is higher at this point in time than it was during the Great Recession, even though some of our fundamentals and some of our numbers look far worse. As you can see now, the peak unemployment during the current recession was well over 30%. During the Great Recession, it was 13.9%. So these are numbers that we're trying to better understand. And again, the only explanation for how a number like that could rise amidst unemployment being at this level and the closures reducing the number of opportunities for spending would be the injection of federal stimulus. So where does Nevada derive most of its taxable retail sales from by way of different industrial codes? Food, services, and drinking places has always taken a #1 position in the state at 20%. Motor vehicle sales and parts dealers, nearly 12%. You can see them as you move down the list, how important each of these categories is to the state as a whole. We see non-store retailers down here at the bottom. I'm next going to show you what it actually had. This is for the period of May to August of 2019. So it's the prior year that we're comparing it to. And when the green bars come in, it'll show what the performance has been from May to August of the current year. And you can see in eating and drinking places, it's been substantially impacted. That's hugely important because that's one of the largest areas of trade that we have in the state. In many of the other areas, you can see the green bar actually outstripping the dark blue bar, which indicates that those areas of trade are doing better than they were in the prior year. And this particular shading shows you which areas have been actually performing better than the prior year. It's again, one of those things, if you looked at it independently during a recession, you would absolutely scratch your head and say, how could this even be possible with unemployment rates being as high as they are and business closures having had the effect that they did for a substantial amount of the year? Once again, the answer is federal stimulus. So what are the areas of trade? How have they performed since the low point of the economic performance during the pandemic, which was roughly the April-May time period? Non-store retailers, again, up 163%. Building material and garden equipment up 18%. Any of them that are green look pretty good to us at this point in time down below. The reductions over that period of time are significant in some of our larger areas of trade. And here I wanted to go off script a little bit and talk about different parts of the state and what their reliances are. In Clark County has a 19+% reliance on the performance of eating and drinking places. And with the closures on the strip and the partial reopening, those have been substantially impacted. At this point in time, we have those estimated to be producing roughly 55% of normal revenue, which is, again, given the size of that to the overall taxable sales base for Clark County, is extraordinarily significant. Also in Clark County, general merchandise is about 9.7% of the total, motor vehicle sales, 9.1%. Clothing and accessories, about 8.9%. Non-store retail, which is internet purchase, 6.5%. So in Clark County, those 5 areas account for 53 +% of the total taxable sales within Clark County. As you move to Washoe County, number one for Washoe County is motor vehicle parts and motor vehicle dealers at 13.1%. Food services and drinking places come in second at about 12%, significantly less than what Clark County's reliance on that area of trade is. General merchandise at 11.2%, non-store retailers at 7.5%, and merchandise wholesalers for durable goods at about 7%. So in those top 5 categories in Washoe County accounts for about 51% of their total taxable sales. As you move to the balance of the state, so excluding Washoe County and Clark County, the number one producer of sales tax in those 15 counties is merchandise wholesalers of durable goods at about 11%, motor vehicle parts at about 9.4%, general merchandise at about 8%, non-store retailers at 6.8%, and machinery manufacturing at 6.4%. So just going over those, wanted to give you a sense of the difference in reliance in different parts of the state on different areas of trade. The fact that in the rural parts of the state, there isn't a heavy dependence upon eating and drinking places, obviously is an indicator of a lower reliance on tourism. And consequently, it shouldn't surprise anybody that the rural parts of the state have been more resilient during this downturn than the urban parts of the state. 41.5% of the total taxable sales in the rural parts of the state come from those 5 categories that I mentioned to you. And in Clark County, those 5 categories add up to 53% of their total taxable sales base. And the point in all of that is that the heavier the reliance on a smaller group of areas of trade to perform well over time, the higher your susceptibility to volatility during economic crisis. And we're certainly seeing that at this point. So congratulations to the rurals for having a more diversified economy with less reliance on some of the more economically volatile areas of trade, serving you well. So returning back to this chart, the net growth in taxable retail sales since May has been a negative nearly 10%, and that's fluctuating. Actually, in the last month, it went up a bit from that. And again, you can contrast that with some of the areas of trade and what the performance has been. I'm going to move through the housing part of it rather quickly. Existing home sales, this is a U.S. value, obviously have continued to decline during the pandemic. We wouldn't have expected differently. New and existing home prices in the Las Vegas area have held fairly well. In the Washoe County area, median prices for both new homes and existing homes a little bit more robust than in Clark County. And one other interesting thing I decided to include in this was just a commentary on, during the Great Recession, we saw a number of mortgage defaults in Nevada, cresting at 134,000. You've seen a steady decline through 2019 since that point in time. And of course, this is the Great Recession that we also refer to as the Great Economic and Housing Bubble. But we've seen an uptick in those foreclosures in the second quarter of 2020 as well. Tourism, again, this is something that is probably certainly more specific to Clark and Washoe County. I'll move through this very quickly, but I'll simply make the point that tourism is important to the entirety of the state. All parts of the state have some reliance upon tourism. Obviously, Clark and Washoe have a greater reliance upon tourism. But when you think about things from a fiscal perspective, the revenues that flow through tourism to the state are extraordinarily important. When you think about the state budget, the largest sources of revenue to the state budget are gaming tax, live entertainment tax, sales tax, modified business tax, commerce tax, each of which has a direct linkage to and susceptibility to visitation throughout the state. So to the extent that visitor volume is off in Southern Nevada or Northern Nevada, the state budget in its entirety is being impacted. Tourist spending, which we normally rely upon to be roughly 25% of the total taxable sales base, is off, and consequently it's affecting your budgets as well. But I'll roll through these fairly quickly. Looking at the Great Recession, we lost 3.3 million visitors over an 18-month period. Looking at what's happened since the pandemic, we've lost 16 million visitors over the course of 6 months. Looking at recovery periods following the Great Recession, it took us roughly 33 months to recover to pre-recession levels. We're not entirely sure how long it's going to take us to recover from the impacts of the current recession and business closures that we're dealing with in Clark and Washoe counties. We lost a couple million attendees over a 19-month period for conventions. We've lost 3 million just over the last 6 months in Clark County. And this is a particularly important area because this represents weekday visitation. Weekend visitation in Clark County has come back rather strong, what we refer to as the drive-in market, which normally is about 50% of total visitation. If you think about visitation, 20% comes from convention and special events, another 15% comes from international. And then you also have the fly-in visitation, which forms a big part of the core visitation. The drive-in market is coming back, although they're coming back at a much lower occupancy rate and average daily room rate than prior to the recession. So after the Great Recession, it took us about 6 years to recover. Where we're going from where we are at this particular point in time to what we would call a full recovery is something that's still under evaluation. Gross gaming revenue, as you can see, that's another huge resource to the state, took a major hit, lost 2.1 billion over 31 months. Just since COVID, we've lost 2.9 billion over 6 months. So I'm going to skip ahead and actually give you a couple of thoughts on what we're looking at and evaluating at this point and what they might mean to all of us. Again, this slide just reiterates that we don't just have a public health crisis, we have first an economic crisis that begets a fiscal crisis. We have a public health crisis that the economic and fiscal impacts will undoubtedly feed into some form of a legal crisis. And throughout this entire pandemic, we've had undoubtedly a social crisis. So the types of questions that we're going to be asking ourselves moving forward: will there be a resurgence in COVID cases? And if so, to what extent will this impact revenues? We are doing modeling on a monthly basis. We're looking at every area of trade, some of which I shared with you when we discussed taxable sales. We're looking at those within Clark County, within Washoe County, and we're looking also at the balance of the state, and we're tracking each individual industrial code. We're doing that under the assumption that we're in a recovery mode at this point and that there would not be an additional impact caused by a resurgence of COVID, but we have to keep our eye on that. When and will there be additional stimulus, and if so, to what degree will it mute the impacts of unemployment and lost commerce? Will a vaccine prove to be effective, and if so, when will it become widely available both in our market and globally, both of which are important because our market is largely imported from other parts of the country and other parts of the world. What would a full recovery actually look like? You know, you probably hear a lot of talk about new normal. For those of us that spend time monitoring the economics of the state, none of us believe that the new normal will be additive. In other words, we expect it to be something that resembles the old normal, but probably at a diminished level. A lot of that will have to do with social attitudes and attitudes toward travel and tourism, toward airline travel, toward ground transportation, and there'll be some sectors or some segments of the overall visitor demographic that will be slower to come back. Will certain sectors of the economy become more permanently home-based as we move forward? And if so, how might that affect things like the commercial real estate market? What social dynamics will change as we move forward, and how will the economy evolve to address them? Again, this is more of a sociological thing, but how will that manifest itself in terms of impact on the overall economy? And will we be able to eventually evolve? And I think this is really one of the most important points. You know, from the introduction, you could tell that I've been at this for about 40 years here in the state. And one of the things I focused on over many of those years is looking at the fiscal structure of the state and of local governments and trying to better understand where we have vulnerabilities. To the extent that we increase our reliance upon things like sales tax, we increase an acceptance of a certain amount of volatility and cyclical impacts from time to time due to normal recessions and other impacts like that, which we're experiencing at this point. It would certainly be my recommendation that we continue to look at the sales tax base and not simply as the sales tax rate as a source of additional stability for the overall sales tax system and as a source of additional revenue as we move forward. And what I mean by that is we tax things that are sold, tangible items that are sold at retail in the state of Nevada. Anything that isn't tangible or sold at retail goes untaxed in the state. And I'm not giving a pro-tax speech by any stretch of the imagination, but over time, that implicitly excludes things like services, which are now more than 60% of our overall economy. And to that, every time we add an additional exemption to those things that are otherwise tangible or purchased at retail, we're further narrowing our retail sales tax base. That's something that absolutely needs to be addressed, or it will continue to become more of a problem in time. And lastly, I know I'm out of time, but lastly, one of the other things we need to be mindful of is what is the expected impact on property tax. No impact